you knew. I knew you knew. But I feel obligated to mark things like that because it's my job. Did I write anything on your Justin papers that you have a question about? Yes. Oh. Oh, I love it when you have to ask me about commas. I love commas. All right. Live for commas. Oh, I think we talked about this already once in here, but maybe it was the junior high kids. I feel like maybe it was the junior high kids. Okay. May I read your sentence publicly? All right. In fact, Christians, comma, who denied that they were Christians, comma, were also set free regardless if they were being truthful or not. Okay. Christians who denied that they were Christians were also set free. All right. Here's the deal. For your whole life, maybe, you've been taught that when you do one of these who, which clauses, you should separate it out with a comma. This is a good practice. But there is a special group of who, which clauses. They're called restrictive clauses, and we don't. And you have used just such a one. Christians. Okay, usually when we use a who, which, we're just describing that class in general. Christians, who are generally good people, sometimes make mistakes. Okay, so that makes sense. But he doesn't mean Christians in general. He says the Christians who denied that they were Christians. That doesn't apply to every Christian, does it? He's talking about the special group, only the ones who denied that they were Christians. When you do this, this is a restrictive who, which clause. It's a restrictive adjective clause, and you don't use a comma. The Christians who denied it. You see, and it only applies to them. So the difference would be, okay, my grandma who makes great cookies, lives in Albuquerque. Okay, great. I'm just describing this grandma. But if I said, the grandma who lives in Albuquerque is coming to visit, I'm not just describing in general grandmas. I'm saying the particular one, the one who lives in Albuquerque is coming to visit, and then I wouldn't need a comma. Does that make sense? And so because in general your punctuation and your syntax is very good, I thought, okay, I will mention this to you. For some of you, if it's still like commas are difficult, I might not pick on something in your paper like that, which is fine. But whenever you're describing someone, and it only applies to a particular portion of that group, like his Christians who denied they were Christians, we usually don't put a comma in, okay? Anything else that I wrote, said? I'm still having some throat, so I may have a coughing fit. Please forgive me if I do. So thank you again for just boldly sharing your picture descriptions with each other last week and getting through the week. We're just going to pick up where we left off and talk about Eusebius books 7 and 8. But I would like you, and see, this is why I'm so angry that I was sick last week, because now next week is another break. We don't meet again next week. I know, and so I feel like it's going to take us forever to get through Eusebius. It's going to feel like we've been reading this forever. So, what? Oh, yes. And Thucydides was long too.
So we were absolutely supposed to read Eusebius 9 and 10 this week.
No. Okay, this is the mistake. I asked Mrs. Jensen and Mrs. Ladson to pass this along, and like, okay, we'll tell everybody. And then I thought I sent a message to the parents, and maybe I didn't. I was kind of sick, and I didn't know what I was doing. Okay, because I told everybody, treat last week like it didn't exist, because we couldn't talk about all 4 books in 1 week. That wasn't going to happen. And so, like, we're just. Yeah, no, we have no. So now you have no assignment whatsoever over a break. But go back over 9 and 10, like review it. But here's what I wanted you to write for me, which you would be handing to me today if I'd been sick. just a short summa, one paragraph. And this is the topic. Why is persecution good for the church? This is a two-part. Okay, that's part number one. Why is persecution good for the church? I am assuming that it is. I am assuming, as we've seen, that during times of persecution, the church grows dramatically, and people tend to be very devoted in their faith, not wishy-washy. So that's the first part. Why is persecution good for the church? And the second one, why don't we want it? Persecution. Why don't we want persecution? I know that sounds like a very easy question to answer. I don't want to get killed. I don't want them to, I don't know, poke my eyes out or drag me across hot coals. I don't want it. But if we really believe that it's beneficial, why do we run from it? Why do we not want it? I just want you to just give me your thoughts on that. Just a paragraph. And read Eusebius 9 and 10. If you have already read it, just take some time. It doesn't ever hurt you to read something again. I guarantee if you read something twice, you will notice things you did not notice the first time. If it's a good book, and this one is, you will notice things. And that's it. And I will also tell you that chapters 9 to 10 are not very long. So it's a really light duty. And unfortunately, if I hadn't been sick, you would have been reading On the Incarnation by Athanasius, which is more like 80 pages. It's a whole book that we're going to read in 1 week, but it's pretty straightforward. Anyway, now we're going to not get to do that over break, but sorry. And when it gets closer to the end of the year, we'll decide what we want to do about those last two classes, if we want to try to get together, if you guys want to ditch the last book, or how we'll fix it. What?
Or should we try to meet this break?
Well, yeah, I can't really. First of all, I don't know where we'd meet. Everybody'd have to be willing to come to my house. But also, Kyle, I already redid my whole schedule for my other kids to match you guys. So none of my kids are meeting next week, so that I can keep you all doing the same week. So it's okay. It's okay. Well, in April, we'll talk about what you might want to do, or if you guys just don't want to meet, or if you just want to watch the videos. I also would love to invite some of you to see an end-of-year movie at my house, a Roman-themed movie that everybody should see. It's not Gladiator. It's funny. It's funny. Okay. Let's look at book 7. But before we do, I would like to ask you guys a question. Because I think that this theme runs through books 7 and 8. When we read the letter to Diognetus, that letter, we don't know who wrote it. We just know who it's to His Excellency Diognetus. The author of this book said, what the soul is in the body, that Christians are in the world. What the soul is in the body, that Christians are in the world. Christians are the soul of the world. And I think we mentioned this briefly, but we didn't really pursue it. And I'd like to pursue it a little bit because I feel like this is sort of the theme, partially the theme of Eusebius's, the end of his book here. So what does your soul do in your body? What's it for? Okay, when it leaves, we die. So it gives life. And if it's removed, there's no life. Okay. So is that but would that also apply to animals? Because animals are sentient.
They don't have a soul. They don't have
A rational, we would say a rational soul. Okay. But I mean, it does. That's something we also seem to share with the animals. And so I'm thinking more of human soul. Okay. Want to just want to eat and sleep. Now, yeah. So it gives us. So let's put those two together. Our soul is our awareness of what is right and wrong, and somehow it's also an awareness that we are made, that we are not animals, that we live on a higher plane, that we reason, that we think, that we make choices based on thought and not instinct, perhaps. Okay. So if the soul leaves, it dies. The soul informs you of what is right. It informs you of who you are. And I mean that as a human being, but let's just all stop for a minute and think about you. The you inside your head. The you only you know, only you and God. And I don't mean your secrets, or I mean you, who you are deep down, that only you and God know. You know what I mean. We've all got it. And we can't get inside someone else's head to it in someone else. You know what I mean? But we all know I'm Michelle, and all my experiences I know there's a me in there. There's a me, but I can't really explain. And you each have one too. That's what our soul is. So Thomas Aquinas, wrote tons of philosophy, largely based on Aristotle. And Aristotle and Greek philosophers talked a lot about matter and form. Okay, so you know what matter is. It's stuff. You can touch it. But the thing is, we can't. Matter always comes to us in a certain form. This is in the form of a book. This is in the form of a chair. This is in the form of a coat and a whiteboard. There's no just matter here with no form. It's like the blob. But even the blob has a form. He's the blob, right? Or silly putty or whatever. It's still got a form. And so imagine, if you can, like, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness hovered over the face of the deep, like matter with nothing. It's got no, I know, my brain's going to explode because I don't understand what that is. So Thomas Aquinas, and following Aristotle, said that, so you have matter and then it has a form imprinted on it, right? So that matter is a chair because it's been formed to be a chair, right? Okay, so here's the mind-blowing thing about Thomas Aquinas. He said that the soul is the form of the body. Now, me, because I'm stupider than Thomas Aquinas, would say, no, Mr. Aquinas. The body is the form. Do you know what I mean? Look, this is the form. See it? The form. And he said, no, your soul imprints who you are on the body. The soul is the form. The body isn't the form. I'll let you think about that for the next 2 weeks. Anyway. So what if the soul of your body is what makes you human? It imposes on you who you are as an individual. Okay, now let's go back to that letter to Diognetus. What the soul is in the body Christians are in the world. He said the church was the soul of the world, gives its life. If we remove it, what is left is dead. It gives you a conscience. It gives you an awareness of who you are created to be. It imprints on the world. This is what the world was made to be. This is the form of the world, of society, of the Quad Cities. It's the church. That's pretty cool. It's a very high calling to walk around and say, I am part of the soul of the world. It's depending on me for life, for existence, for understanding, for reason, for the form it takes. And I feel like that's what this unknown author was saying. So we started reading Eusebius, and now it's totally okay if you remember very little of books 7 and 8. Now it's been so long. It's okay. I ended up reading it 3 times because I read it once for you guys, and then I read over it again before I thought we were going to have class, and then I got sick, and then I'm like, well, might as well read it again. And I kept finding things like, oh, I forgot he mentioned that. So Eusebius mentioned numerous times a connection between how the Roman Empire treats the church, the Christians, and its existence, its thriving or lack of thriving. And it struck me as I reread it, it's like saying the church is the soul of the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire doesn't know it. That's the sad thing. It's like if you were insane and you thought your life force, it was like a Horcrux in Voldemort or something. Like you thought your life force was in the water bottle, and it's like, oh, I have to have my water bottle. They would incarcerate you. You would be insane if you thought that if you let go of your water bottle, you would die and you would cease to be you. You've mistaken what makes you you. You've mistaken your soul for something else. And the Roman Empire mistook their soul. Does that make sense to you guys even? And thought it was Jupiter and Juno and and Apollo and Venus and all the rest of them, because it mistook where its soul was. I feel like that's what Eusebius is trying to tell us. So let's take a look. We heard a lot more about Dionysius, our friendly bishop of Alexandria, in book 7. But he starts off on this note about the Roman Empire and the Christians and how they're connected. He said, when Decius, so just to remind you, Decius was a Roman emperor who was one of them that said, we're going to round all of you up and kill you. It's not just a local, we're kind of ticked off with you. We're systematically going to eliminate you. Decius did this. Decius reigned less than 2 years. He and his sons were killed, and Gallus succeeded him. Gallus failed to note Decius's mistake or avoid that which caused his fall, and he stumbled over the same stone with his eyes open. When his reign was prospering and matters going to his liking, he expelled the holy men who were praying God for his peace and health. In banishing them, then, he also banished their prayers on his behalf. He threw out the soul of the empire, not learning that Decius had done the same thing and come to a bad end. And so we're going to read this again and again. There's going to be a cycle here for a while of emperors coming to their senses and realizing this isn't working. And not only is it not working, but it's not beneficial to the empire to be persecuting this group of people. And then they forget. Like, oh, hate those Christians. We're going to round them up again. Over and over. The first question I asked you, though, was over what issue did Cyprian of Carthage and Stephen, the Bishop of Rome, have an argument? This is on page 79 in your. That is not. Yes. In other words, baptism. Baptism. Thank you, Lauren. We have a bunch of people who were heretics and now they want to come back to the church, and the heretics baptize them. What do? Do we rebaptize them? Do we say, you misunderstood, like you were misled and now you've repented? But God understands and God led you to us, and so we are going to take as valid what you've done before. Cyprian of Carthage was just dead set on, we are rebaptizing all those people. What do you do with the people who left the heresy 5 years ago, 8 years ago? They've been taking communion all this time. You say, nope, no bread and wine for you. Now you have to get rebaptized. No. And Stephen in Rome said, it was wrong to make any innovation contrary to the tradition established from the beginning, and was very angry. We have never asked these people to do this. We've always welcomed them in, and Stephen in Rome prevailed. And to this day, I have switched Christian traditions, shall we say, and I was not rebaptized. Like, no, you were baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I've got a baptismal certificate. You're good. The fact that you were baptized by those people, we're good with that. That is the arrangement that Christianity has with each other. But it goes back to this point. Remember, it was a big deal because there were a lot of heretics. These Gnostic crazy groups were rising up. But the important thing was they came to an agreement. They came to an agreement with each other. There were some hot letters passed back and forth. All right, some heated controversy, but they came to an agreement on that. He also mentions at the same time, this is Dionysius writing again. In the same letter, he refers to the Sabellian heretics. It's the only mention here, but there's a footnote. Sabellius taught that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were merely names for the various modes by which one God revealed himself in his deeds. There's really only one. Just sometimes we call him Father, and sometimes we call him Son, and sometimes we call him Holy Spirit. See, and it's like one entity wears three masks, and we know him under different masks. So here's the problem, and I mean, it's just a little mention in this book. You're like, why is Mrs. Ferguson making a big deal about this? We're going to be talking about some other groups of heretics. And the problem in the early church was, what's up with Jesus? How is he a man and God? Is he more man? Is he more God? What do we do with that? And so there was this spectrum, right? And so on this end, he's like, Jesus is a man. And this side, Jesus is God. And these heresies kept being somewhere on the spectrum. So for example, if we make him too much, he's all God. So Sabellius is doing something like this. We're emphasizing that Jesus is God. But we kind of forget about the man part, and we move that direction. And the church kept saying, no, you can't go there. You have to remember he's a man too. But then they would go this way and say Jesus is just a man, or the one we're going to talk about not long from now. Jesus was a man, and then the Christ came down on him in his baptism and just lived in him for a while, and then it left, and then he died. And now we're like, what the heck? But this was important to them and made sense to them, because the problem was, well, how can God die? God can't die. But Jesus is God, but Jesus died. So did God the Father die? And then people say, no, God the Son died. Oh, are you believing in more than one God? And so no matter what people said, they would accuse you of swinging too far one way or another. Does that make sense? Until we get to the the Arians that we're going to talk about. So Sibelius is just another one, totally, pronounced heretical. You can't say that it's all God, there's no man involved, that Jesus isn't separate somehow from the Father. But the minute someone walked around saying Jesus is separate from the Father, someone would say, oh, are you a heretic? Because Jesus is God, And it took a while, it took some wrangling for the church to come up with a confession of faith that accommodated both. Yeah, go ahead, Ethan.
It's so used now that before that it's so important to consider the fact that Jesus was 100% God and 100% man. That it's funny for us Christians now, but I guess it is kind of hard to understand that. But then again, it's not for us to understand. Who are we to know the power of God?
Exactly. No, it is mysterious. You can't really figure out how he did this. We'll pursue this more as we read on the Incarnation, which is our next book, um, uh, written by a man who fought against one of these heresies. But the important thing, it's important for us not to think, oh, those wrangling over words. It's not really important. Just believe in Jesus. Okay, what is that? Who is that Jesus you're believing in? Is he God? Is he a man? Is he a good teacher? Is he you we can't as the church say just if everybody would just believe and follow Jesus everything would be okay. No, we need to define Jesus. Who is this Jesus that you think you're following? Because my Jesus is not the same as the Mormon Jesus. Do you know what I mean? And so don't ever, as through the rest of this school year, we're going to talk about various ones of these heresies. And this is vitally important because knowing who is this Messiah who gives us life? Who is it that we're bowing down and worshiping? Was important for them. Anyway, but Sibelius was so worried about maintaining the divinity that he just compressed them all into one unit. And this was, the bishops got together and said, no, that's not what the church teaches. That's not Christian teaching. Okay, that is wrong. All right. Let's move on to more persecution. When Gallus and his associates had ruled for less than 2 years, remember he's the guy who started out okay, but then ignored what Decius had done and decided to persecute the Christians. He was removed in favor of Valerian and his son Gallienus. And I just want to, a couple of times, I want to read what's in the back of your chapter, the rundown on the emperors. Valerian and his son Gallienus became co-emperors, administering the eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire, respectively. Their joint rule was riddled with crises. German and Gothic tribes were penetrating the Rhine frontier. A revived Persia was moving into Syria. Pirates were infesting the Mediterranean sea lanes, and bandits the highways. Okay, the reason I'm reading this to you is they're persecuting the soul of the world. Keep remember what's happening, all right? And everything's going south on them. Plague broke out in Egypt. Valerian went against the Persians and ended up being captured by them. It says there's a rock relief near Persepolis, still shows him kneeling in chains before a victorious Persian Shapur on horseback. And he died there shortly thereafter in shameful captivity, the only Roman emperor that had been captured in battle. All right, so this is Valerian. And he decides to persecute. In his time, in Valerian's time, Dionysius, our friend that we keep reading about, Bishop of Alexandria, is ordered away from his bishopric, just sent into exile. And I just want to read the meeting that they had. It says, when Dionysius and his fellow presbyters were brought into court, Aemilianus, the deputy governor, said, I told you of the generosity of our lords, Valerian and Gallienus, the generosity our lords have shown you, the opportunity of freedom if you do what is natural and worship the gods that preserve their rule, but forget those that are unnatural. Dionysius, you got a choice. Worship the gods, the gods that preserve their rule. Oh, no, you've forgotten where your soul is. They're not the gods that preserve your rule. And they want you to forget those that are unnatural. Topsy-turvy. What do you say to this? I doubt that you will be ungrateful for their kindness since they advise you for your own good. Dionysius says, not all men worship all gods, but each those whom he regards as such. We worship the one God and creator of all things, who entrusted the empire to his most beloved Augusti, Valerian, and Gallienus, and we pray to him continually that their rule will remain unshaken. The governor says, who prevents you from worshiping this God too, if he is a god, along with the natural gods? You were commanded to worship the gods, and gods known to all. He says, we worship no one else. The governor says, I see that you are both ungrateful and insensitive to the indulgence of our Augusti. Therefore, you shall not remain in this city, but leave for a place called Sephro in Libya, a spot I selected by command of our Augusti. Under no circumstances will you or any others be permitted to hold assemblies or enter the so-called cemeteries. Why do they go in the cemeteries? To pray and have services, graveside. If anyone fails to go to the place designated or is found in any meeting, he will endanger himself, for you will be observed. Begone, then, to the place appointed. He goes on to say, even though I was sick, he rushed me off without granting a single day's grace. What time did I then have for holding or not holding an assembly? Still, we did not refrain from assembling with the Lord openly. I tried all the harder to convene those in the city as if I were with them. At Sephro, a large church formed, some following us from the city, others joining us from the rest of Egypt. First we were persecuted and stoned, but then some of the heathen abandoned their idols and turned to God. Through us, the word was sown among them for the first time, and it seems that for this God exiled us to them and returned us when we had finished our mission. You know what? When you banish the soul takes life with it, wherever it goes. And they took it to Sephro and started a church there. And people collected around them. Yes.
It's very interesting that they call not praising the gods unnatural when they're the same people who are accumulating a bunch of random gods from random places. When Rome was developing as a nation, it just kept accumulating
Yes.
gods.
Yes.
So you're gonna call it natural to accumulate a bunch of gods from random people. But
yes.
It's unnatural to a certain point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And which was one of Justin's points, exactly, right?
Which makes sense.
That, these Isis worshippers in Egypt and whatever, the Anubis, dog-headed god, whatever. You're fine with them. It's not reasonable or rational. Maybe, I asked you to write in your papers, why do you think the emperors were not convinced? Some of you hinted at this, because their objection to Christianity was not reasonable or rational. It was in their guts. It was in their spirits. It was not based in reason. All right. Well, Valerian died, as we said, captured by the Persians. His son, now sole emperor, ruled more prudently and immediately ended the persecution by an edict with these words. And then he printed the Edict of Toleration here. In the back, it tells us about Gallienus that his wife, the Empress Salinina, was a Christian. And Gallienus himself, though no convert, reversed his father's policy of persecution. There was a place, though, where persecution would still continue to linger, and it was in the army. Would I be right in assuming that all of us in this room don't think it's wrong for a Christian to join the army? Like, it's okay if you do think it's wrong. I don't want to out you, but in general, most Christians, there are pacifist groups. I think Quakers are still, pacifist, and Jehovah's Witnesses, which are heretics, are pacifist. But for the most part, we're okay with the fact of being in the military, and that if you kill someone in a war, it's not the same as murder. When you're under orders and you're defending your home, it's more like self-defense. Okay, so it's fine if you don't agree with that. But I think for the most part, Christianity has kind of settled on that. You have something you want to say?
In my opinion, it goes along the lines of what God commanded us to obey our superiors. So, considering that if we do join the army, we do have a superior as a sergeant general, or general, or chief general, we have to do what they say.
Yeah, you do.
And we have to obey them. And the only time we stop obeying them is if they try to endanger our relationship with God.
Yeah.
That's when we resist.
And if I have to kill someone in war because they're about to kill the guy next to me, then do it. But in the early church, there was some question about this. Not as much question as you would think, but there was some question. It wasn't so much, though, you have to kill someone, as they might ask you to worship Caesar. It's a government job. And so you have to do what the government says. And so, for the most part, they'd have long periods where there wasn't much persecution, and Christians would rise to pretty high rank in the army because they were good, they were loyal, they did the right thing. But then there'd be a commanding officer come, I'm going to clean out the riffraff. All of you, over here. It's incense to Caesar time. Do it. And a lot of them lost their jobs. Or worse. In the case of Macrinus here, I want to read you his story. He was Marinus, was honored with high rank in the army and also prominent through birth and wealth. A mark of honor among the Romans is the vine switch, and those who win it become centurions. A post became vacant, and in the order of seniority, Marinus was next in line. But when he was on the point of receiving the honor, another stepped up to the tribunal and stated that Marinus was disqualified by long-established laws from sharing any Roman rank, since he was a Christian and did not sacrifice to the emperors, and so the office fell to himself. Right, we can see what this guy's motivation is right away, right? I want the job. I don't really give a hoot whether this guy's a Christian or not. I just want his job. Achaeus the judge first asked what opinions Marinus held, and when he saw that he steadfastly confessed his Christianity, he granted him 3 hours to reconsider. When he left the court, Theotechnos, the local bishop, took him by the hand and led him to the church. Once inside, he placed him in front of the altar, and raising his cloak, he pointed to the sword at his side. Then he brought the book of the divine Gospels, placed it before him, and asked him to choose which of the two he preferred. Without hesitation, he put out his right hand and took the divine book. Hold fast, then, Theotechnos told him. Hold fast to God. With his strength may you obtain what you have chosen. Go in peace. Just as he was returning, a herald announced that the time had expired and summoned him to the court. Standing before the judge, he showed still greater fervor for the faith. He was immediately led off to execution and so found fulfillment. We are good to be reminded that we live in a country where it probably is not going to happen, but there may come a time when we lose our jobs, we lose our positions because of our Christianity. And Marinus lost his life. A lot of these people just did lose their jobs. They let them just leave the army. But you remember that it was, bye, you're done with the army, no pension, no retirement. Because, you do your stint in the army and you get pension, you get land. No, none of that. Good luck making a living, since you've been in the army since you were 18 and this is all you know how to do. they lost all of their livelihood. And it's just, okay, let's just all, over the next couple of weeks, be thankful for where we live, that none of our parents are probably going to lose their jobs because they're Christians. But that we don't know that it will always be that way. And that and just ask God to make us strong if we ever have to choose between the sword and the book, or the money in the book, or the, whatever it is that's the symbol of your profession and the Bible, that we can make the right decision, even if we lose everything because of it. Yeah, Ethan.
That's the problem with people. And um, when Jesus came, he kind of ended the whole, like, this is an organized religion, this is organized, this is Jewish faith, blah, blah, blah. He turned that into, like, oh, this is Christianity, this is a faith, this is faith, this is faith. This isn't legalization, this isn't blah, 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 this isn't rules, blah, blah, blah. This is the way that we need to live, blah, blah, blah. And, well, every other religion is legalistic and religion, but, like, I mean, it's just the power of evil and heretics and all that stuff. The Catholics did it. They took power, and if somebody didn't succumb to what they wanted to do, if they didn't get baptized as a child, they have to do whatever they want. It's just.
And I'm just going to give fair shout out to the Protestants as well, who did their fair share of horrible persecution in areas where they took power later. But yes, I understand the spirit of what you're saying. There were more rules than you think. It wasn't just kind of a floating out there, la-di-da, it was organized and there were bishops. But yes, the spirit that wants to remove the soul of the world remains constant, right? By whatever means. And if you can do that from outside the church, great. If you can do that from inside the church, better, even better. And it's just like Justin, when he said that, there are people who call themselves Christians that do bad things, but they are not representative sample of what it really means to be a Christian. This is true in all ages, isn't it? People who do terrible things, supposedly because they're Christians, but they're obviously not. Anyway, Marinus made a very hard decision, and it cost him not just his job, but his life as well. But he got an everlasting reward. He's with the martyrs in heaven, rejoicing and crying out in Revelation, "How long, O Lord, before you avenge our blood?" With the white robes under the altar. Amazing. He's there, which is why I love to read about these people, because we wouldn't know them if Eusebius hadn't written this down for us. He also writes down that in Caesarea Philippi, there's a statue of Jesus and the woman with the hemorrhage, with the issue of blood, who touched his cloak. This is the art I brought in. This is another catacomb art. The woman is kneeling down and touching the hem of his garment and being healed. Apparently, this only shows up in catacomb art twice. This is one of them. It kind of makes me wonder if the people, like, they had a long-term chronic illness or something, and God healed them, or God didn't heal them of the chronic illness, but healed them spiritually, you know what I mean? And this is in honor of that. This is in Rome as well. Apparently, they excavated this particular catacomb between 2004 and 2010, found 20,000 skeletons, 20,000 burials in this particular catacomb. Yes, but this is the woman who apparently traditionally is from Caesarea Philippi. And it says, on a high stone base at the gates of her home stood a bronze statue of a woman on bent knee, stretching out her hands like a suppliant. Opposite to this was another of the same material, a standing figure of a man clothed in a handsome double cloak and reaching his hand out to the woman. Near his feet at the monument grew an exotic herb that climbed up to the hem of the bronze double cloak and served as an antidote for diseases of every kind. This statue, they said, resembled the features of Jesus and was still extant in my own time. I saw it with my own eyes when I stayed in the city. It is not surprising that those Gentiles who long ago were benefited by our Savior should have made things like these, since I have examined likenesses of his apostles also, Peter and Paul, and in fact of Christ himself preserved in color portrait paintings. And this is to be expected, since ancient Gentiles customarily honored them as saviors in this unreserved fashion. Remember, Jews don't make statues. Jews don't paint portraits. The Gentile world felt no such qualms. God will so make a statue of Jesus healing the woman. We'll paint it on the walls of the catacombs, of the tombs. And this is where Christian art comes from. These Gentiles who didn't feel the restraint. And very soon the Jewish believers got on board with that and decorated their churches amazingly with paintings and all sorts of decorative stuff inside the early churches, which to some of us who grew up with rather more bare churches is a little jarring. It's like, oh my goodness, look at all the paintings and statues and stuff in their church. And but that's what they did. They did because it was a reminder of that great cloud of witnesses in the book of Hebrews. And I like to compare it to many of us probably have pictures of family on the walls of our house somewhere. And we don't really think they're watching us through the frames but we remember them every time we walk by. It reminds us of our families. Anyway, I'm so glad that the Gentiles decided it was okay to make images because it gave us some of the most beautiful art. And I still think this is really a bang up good job for in the dark in a cave by lamplight. I couldn't do that in the bright sunlight. Okay, so on to the problems when you take the soul out of the world. We remove the soul from the world, the church. The next problem they had was plague. Dionysius is writing what is called a festival letter. I said this twice, festival letter. The bishop of an area would write some sort of like press release, communication to the Christians of his area before major feasts. So, and the biggest one being Easter. So during the time up to Easter, the bishop would release some sort of, very much like a pep talk sermon when you go into Lent or something like that. It's like, we are marching with Christ towards the cross, but he is risen. And you know what I mean? That sort of thing. So the bishop would release something as a festival letter, okay? And so in this particular festival letter, he was saying that things weren't so hunky-dory, even though Easter's approaching. He said, this is hardly a time for celebration. Alas, all is lamentation and mourning for those dead and dying day by day. As was written of the Egyptian firstborn, so also now, there is not a house without one dead, and would that it were only one. Many terrible things happened to us also before this. At first we were driven out, persecuted, and killed, but we kept our festival even then. And every spot where we were molested became for us a place to celebrate, whether field, desert, ship, inn, or prison. But the brightest festival of all was kept by the fulfilled martyrs who feasted in heaven. And then he goes on to talk about the large numbers of deaths from plague. And this was the next question I asked you. How did the behavior of the Christians during the plague differ from the behavior of the heathen? It says, most of our brethren showed love and loyalty in not sparing themselves while helping one another, tending to the sick with no thought of danger, and gladly departing this life with them after becoming infected with their disease. You know, I read that and it hurts my heart a little bit. I want Jesus to protect them from the disease. They're being so good to take care of the sick. There is no such guarantee. They caught it and died too. Many who nursed others to health died themselves, thus transferring their death to themselves. The best of our own brothers lost their lives in this way, some presbyters, deacons, and laymen, a form of death based on strong faith and piety that seems in every way equal to martyrdom. They would take up the bodies of the saints, close their eyes, shut their mouths, and carry them on their shoulders. They would embrace them, wash and dress them in burial clothes, and soon receive the same services themselves. The heathen were the exact opposite. They pushed away those with the first signs of the disease and fled from their dearest. They even threw them half dead into the roads and treated unburied corpses like refuse in hopes of avoiding the plague of death, which for all their efforts was difficult to escape.
With the whole like trading sickness, helping someone, and in return you're getting their disease. That's basically what Christ did for us.
It is. He took upon himself our disease. He carried our diseases. These people, it says in the Bible, bear one another's burdens in love. These people literally did. They bore the burden of death from the plague. They're nursing the other ones to health. You know, what we do as the soul of the world to give it life matters. Really, really matters.
It almost feels like it's worse than being a martyr because you know that it's coming as martyr as fast. But when you're sick, you're slowly dying and you know you're gonna die. But it takes like days and you're just there. Like, no one's gonna happen, but torture.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing, it's like, I always, when I think about heaven, it's really hard to imagine that you can be really happy without sorrow. And then knowing that you could die in any way, like, whether it's like a fatal accident, slowly, like Kyla said, or maybe it's just you die from sleep. I mean, it all will end in the torture in some way.
Yeah, we're all going to go there. It's going to happen to all of us. And what better way to do it but helping someone else when it happens. And so, this made a marked impression on the pagans, on the heathen, when they saw Christians willing to take care of their sick and die doing it. And that our kind was just terrible, selfish. It made a huge impression, and I think it still does. When we do acts of charity, when we do acts of love, it makes an impression because we too live in a world that lacks love. Do you know? And I'm not thinking of this necessarily physical illness, but just casts away those dearest to you because your priorities are somewhere else. And we don't do that. We don't do that. It's a lovely image. Another lovely image that I want to mention. I'm not going to go into it. It's about another one of these heretical teachings that I'm not really going to go into, because what I care much more about is what they did about it. And I just thought this was a remarkable paragraph. It's Dionysius again. Showed up at Arsinoe, which is where they're having a meeting about what is this Nepos guy and what is he teaching. It says, I convened a meeting of the presbyters and teachers of the village congregations and urged them to air the issue in public. When they brought me this book as some invincible fortress, I sat with them for 3 days in a row, from morning until night, criticizing what had been written. In so doing, I was greatly impressed by the soundness, sincerity, and logic and intelligence of the brethren, as we discussed methodically and with restraint the difficulties and points of agreement. We refused to cling blindly to prior opinions or avoid problems, but tried our utmost to grapple with the issues and master them. Nor were we ashamed to alter our opinions, if convinced, but honestly and trusting in God, we accepted whatever was proven by the Holy Scriptures. In the end, the originator of this teaching, in the presence of all, agreed and promised that he would no longer adhere to it. What struck me was we all sat down and we talked reasonably and kindly. And nobody went into this saying, I am right and I know I'm right and I'm going to prove to you you're wrong. I'm going to win this argument. If we are convinced that we are mistaken, we will be willing to change our opinions about this. I thought that was beautiful, honestly. And I have no reason to believe that we're much different today than the Roman Empire. The people arguing with each other and yelling at each other about policy or whatever, not really listening to the other side. Certainly not willing to say, if you prove the other side is right, I will change my opinion. I doubt they heard that much more than we hear it. But the Christians got to, unfortunately, they didn't always work this way. So they did get into terrible fights. But when it worked well, they all got together in a council and said, let's see, what does the Bible say about this? What does the church teach about this? If I am wrong, I will repent and change. I thought that was great. Because, I'm going to tell you guys a horrible secret. You may be wrong. You may be wrong. And you may be wrong about something, not necessarily religious. I mean, anything, And you may find out you were wrong most of your life. It's very humbling to have to say, you know what? I thought this my whole life and I was wrong. And they were willing to do it. I like that. Why does Dionysius think that maybe Revelation wasn't written by John?
The style and John doesn't put his name in. Oh, it was written by John.
It was written by, yes, John the Apostle. I should say that.
Can I read the
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. That therefore he was named John, and that this book is by a John, by some holy inspired writer, I will not deny. But I do not agree that he was the apostle, the son of
Zebedee. Mm-hmm.
the brother of James, who wrote the gospel according to John, and the general epistle. From the character of each and on the style and format of Revelation, I conclude that the author is not the same. For the evangelist nowhere names himself in either the gospel or epistle, in either the first or third person, whereas the author of Revelation announces himself from the very beginning. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which he sent by his angel to his servant John.
Yeah. There was distinction in style. He even goes on to talk about the form Greek. And the fact that John was not accustomed to saying, hey, I, John, wrote this. He uses code. In the gospel, he's the disciple whom Jesus loved. In his epistles, he's the presbyter. He's not, hey, it's me, John. But Revelation is just all over the place. John, wrote this. This is still, we're not till heaven going to know the answer to this question. This is still debated. There are still a large contingent that just feels like Revelation was, as you said, the church has chosen this book as inspired scripture. So it is. Because the church said it was, so it is. And it was written by some guy named John. He also says that they point in Ephesus 2 different graves of John. Maybe there's 2 Johns hanging out in Ephesus, and they got same place, same time period, and they got confused with each other. The interesting thing about this section, Dionysius is doing what we call like literary criticism. He's doing something that we think is very modern. Looking at the text and looking at the syntax and the form of the vocabulary and the style, and we're going to see, who this belongs to, where it belongs. We think that people learned to do this in the 18th and 19th century. Apparently not. Dionysius was completely equipped to do a critical study of the Gospel of John and the epistles of John and Revelation and come to the conclusion that they were probably by 2 different authors. Anyway, I'm thinking of all the times in my life modern people insinuate that Christians are, blindly believe whatever they've been told or aren't good critical thinkers or whatever. 1700 years ago, Dionysius was doing a critical reading of various books of the Bible and trying to decide who wrote them, much as we continue to do with the book of Hebrews, that we don't know who the author is. Okay. Gallienus moved on. Aurelian came to the throne. Originally, Aurelian was being so kind to the church that they actually asked him for a ruling on a particular heretical question. Such was his disposition towards us at the time, but as his reign went on, his attitude changed. I know. And pressured by certain advisors to institute a persecution against us, which provoked much comment everywhere. All right. He ruled 6 years. His sons ruled, and then it says, the government fell to Diocletian and those he brought in. Under them, the persecution and destruction of churches in my own day occurred. This is that moment that I told you to look out for when Eusebius is moving into his own time. And he's going to do a lot less. I mean, he quotes documents, but there's a lot more. I saw this. I was there when this happened. And not huge letters written by other people. He doesn't need the letters anymore. He was there. He was there. And Diocletian plays a big part in the next book. I just want to mention one more thing in book 7. A guy named Manny. He calls him the maniac, whose name is reflected in his demon-possessed heresy, because maniac. Founded a heresy called the Manichaeans after him. File this away, all right, the Manichaeans, because in a couple weeks we're going to read the Confessions of St. Augustine. St. Augustine did a lot of searching before he found Christianity. Some of that searching was among the Manichaeans. He was a Manichaean heretic. And we're going to hear a lot about the kooky stuff these people believed. Serious kooky stuff. Anyway, they were just rising about the time of Diocletian. Augustine's going to be one of them 150 years later. They're still going to be around. Okay, let's move on to book 8. According to the first section of book 8, what was the status of Christians before this most recent persecution? And what does Eusebius think brought on the persecution? How was the church doing at the beginning of book 8?
They were participating in the government.
Yeah.
They were respected by everyone.
They were free. They were free. He says, before the persecution of my own day, the message given through Christ to the world of reverence to God was accorded honor and freedom by all men, Greeks and non-Greeks alike. Rulers granted our people favors and even permitted them to govern provinces. In imperial palaces, emperors allowed members of their own households to practice the faith openly. Congregations worshipped in new, spacious churches that replaced the old. This all progressed day by day, the divine hand protecting its people from jealousy or plot, so long as they are worthy. What's the second part of my question? Why does Eusebius believe persecution fell on the church under Diocletian?
This persecution strengthens the church.
Yes, and that is true, but it doesn't make the second answer to this false. It's a both and. Yes. Why did the church need strengthening? They were slackers. They were slackers. Much like the question I've asked you to write on, why is persecution good for the church and why don't we want it? Because we're slackers. Doesn't it? If you're going to kill me, I'm going to really believe it, or I'm just going to do the pinch of incense to Caesar. It's terrible. Eusebius says greater freedom brought with it arrogance and sloth. We began envying and attacking one another, making war on ourselves with weapons formed from words. Church leaders attacked church leaders, and laymen formed factions against laymen. Unspeakable hypocrisy and pretense reached their evil limit. Finally, while the assemblies were still crowded, divine judgment with its accustomed mercy. There's what Ethan was talking about. It's a mercy of God to be judged now. Don't want to wait. And the persecution began with our brothers in the army. Again, where they can crack down on a group of people easily and make them a sacrifice. He says in the next section, I saw with my own eyes the houses of worship demolished to their foundations. In March of the 19th year of Diocletian's reign, when the festival of the Savior's Passion was approaching, Easter, an imperial edict was announced everywhere ordering that the churches be demolished and the scriptures destroyed by fire. Any Christians who held high places would lose them, while those in households would be imprisoned if they continued to profess Christianity. Soon, other edicts appeared ordering that the presidents of the churches everywhere be thrown into prison and then forced by every sort of device to offer sacrifice. All right. He mentions the first guy in Nicomedia. They posted the bill, the law. The guy just ripped it down and tore it to shreds. Boom. Except that they killed him for that. But it must have been very satisfying. Just rip it off the wall and shred it. And they said, and this is where the emperors were. Diocletian and Galerius were there at the time. I wanted to mention the martyrs in Phoenicia. It says, we know the luminaries in Palestine and those at Tyre and Phoenicia. I myself was there when this was happening. I saw the divine power of our Savior Jesus Christ himself, the object of their witness, clearly present and revealing itself to the martyrs. The man-eaters who for some time did not dare to touch or even approach those who were God's beloved, but attacked others who were goading them on from outside. The animals wouldn't even attack them. The holy champions, though, they stood naked and waved their hands to attract the animals as they were ordered to do, were left untouched. Or when the beasts did rush at them, they were stopped as if by some divine power and would retreat. For a long time this went on, astonishing the spectators. And when the first beast did nothing, a second and a third were released against one and the same martyr. I need to, just a second. I'll take a moment, but this hardly ever happens to me. I need to look something up and read it to you guys. But I have one of those phones where you have to turn on your internet because I don't have internet all the time. Hang on. There's a goal here. Yeah. I noticed this morning when I read this, and I thought, that's amazing. Okay. So I have an app on my phone that gives me what the martyrs of the day, like the feast day. Agapios the martyr and his companions. The holy martyrs contested for piety's sake during the reign of Diocletian, when Urban was governor of Caesarea of Palestine. When Urban had commanded that together with a heathen festival, certain condemned Christians be publicly classed to wild beasts. Timoleus, a native of Pontus, Dionysius of Tripolis in Phoenicia, Romulus of Diospolis, Plesius and Alexander from Egypt, and another Alexander from Gaza, tied their own hands and presented themselves to Urban when the exhibition was about to begin, professing their faith in Christ. They were immediately cast into prison. A few days later, Agapios and Dionysius also presented themselves. All were beheaded together at Caesarea. Their martyrdom is recorded by Eusebius, Ecclesiastical History, Book 8, called The Martyrs of Palestine. This is their day. This is their day. They are celebrated by the church today, and we just happen to be reading about them today, which is awesome. And I will read you today's prayer. This is the hymn, the prayer. Let all of us entreat Christ the Lord's holy martyrs, for they make supplication for our soul's salvation. With faith and with longing, therefore, let us draw nigh unto them. for they overflow with the divine grace of healings, and they drive away the ranks of demons in terror as guardians of the faith. They drive away the demons in terror. When people lay down their lives, I love that. There's another prayer that goes along, I need to turn my internet off, that goes along with some of the martyr days. And they say this, for he cast down their strength and wholly destroyed the demon's strengthless presumption. Wholly destroyed the demon's strengthless presumption. Oh, it's very strong. Like those demons thought they were doing something. Take that. Take that. I will die here and you will not stop me. Anyway, just so happens that these guys who died in Palestine, this is their day. This is their feast day. All right. Thank you for indulging me on that. Okay. There is a lot of martyrdoms. Again, repeatedly, Eusebius says, I witnessed this myself. I saw this myself. But let's wrap up with this last question, which has been really the theme of the whole morning. What parallel does Eusebius see between the state of the empire and its treatment of Christians? Exactly. And the better, the better. He says, before the Roman government went to war against us, and whenever the emperors were friendly and peacefully disposed toward us, it enjoyed an inexpressibly bountiful harvest of good things. But they suddenly canceled their peaceful attitude toward us and started a perpetual war. Less than 2 years later, a revolution took place that overturned the entire government. All right, let's talk about this revolution. Diocletian, many of you know this, and I think I've mentioned it before. Diocletian decided to start a new system in the Roman Empire. We're going to have an empire, an emperor of the West and an emperor of the East, because it's just too doggone big to rule. And each of these is going to be called an Augustus, each of these emperors. And they're going to choose a second in command called a Caesar. And the Caesar automatically takes over when the Augustus dies or retires. We're not going to have any more of this grabbing for power, mess, all this stuff. It's going to be nice and orderly. And Diocletian and Galerius become the first two Augusti. But of course, it doesn't work out well. I mean, Diocletius and Maximian, I'm sorry. And Galerius was his second in command. So in the East, we have Diocletian and Galerius second. In the West, Maximian and a guy named Constantius Chlorus. He's stationed in Britain, and he's the Caesar. All right. So, and this is the, what did he say? The revolution that took place that overturned the government, okay? On May 1st, 305, 2 years after the persecution began, an ailing Diocletian, under enormous pressure from Galerius, his second in command, tearfully abdicated his office and retired. Okay, no mystery there. Second in command guy wants to be in charge. Hey, think you ought to retire? Why don't you retire? He does. Earlier, Galerius, same guy, had persuaded Maximian to retire also. He got the other guy to retire. So now we got the two Caesars moving up. Awesome. Galerius takes over. The new Augusti were Galerius and Constantius Chlorus. But then everything went wrong. Galerius chose both new Caesars. He chooses Constantine Chlorus as new second in command. Dude, you can't do that. His nephew, Maximin Daia, for the East, and his friend Severus for the West. This, when Constantius' son Constantine, or Maximian's son Maxentius, might have been chosen. All right, so I don't even have to read the rest of this in the back. You see where this is going. These guys are not going to get along. Constantine says, oh, may I go to my dad in Britain? No, you may not, because we don't want you stirring up trouble over there. So he slips out, horseback ride across Gaul, hightails it to Britain, meets up with his dad. His dad, I'll go ahead and tell you the story now to get you ready for the rest of this book. His dad dies in York, in England, and the army which was not supposed to happen. This is why they were trying to avoid this, says, we want Constantine to be the new Augustus. All right. In the meantime, the guy who had been with Diocletian, Maximian, his son Maxentius, just decided to go to Rome and become a tyrant. I'm just going to run Rome. Just going to run Rome. So Constantine's over here. Galerius is still over there. We hear Eusebius, another one of those lessons of history, how if you persecute the church horribly, not only do you die, but you are eaten with worms and you stink and pus and just disgusting. This has happened to Galerius. The empire's in turmoil. Eusebius would say, that's what you get for persecuting the soul of the world. Forgetting where your soul is. Everything's in turmoil. The only good guy in the whole thing had been Constantius Chlorus, who apparently did knock down a few churches, but it was mostly for show. He wasn't a super persecutor like Galerius had been. And he died, and his son Constantine is being acclaimed as the Augustus of the West. And so what's he going to do? Well, people in Rome are crying out to him, Constantine, come help us. Maxentius is unbearable. Will you please come do something about this? And over in the East, they're still persecuting Christians. And, you know, you're going to meet a guy named Maximindia. All right. If you went ahead and read, you know, he's terrible. All right. But the drama starts in the West. Constantine heads to Rome. It's like, okay. He sends a message to the East. Hey, stop persecuting those Christians. They don't listen to it. They don't care. So he marches towards Rome from the north. And there's a bridge, one of several bridges across the Tiber River. He's getting close to it, and Maxentius just throws down the bridge. Getting rid of the bridge, just like Horatius at the bridge, you know, except not as dramatically. Breaking down the bridge, he can't come in. Constantine is approaching the city. And for some weird reason, Eusebius doesn't tell this story. We get it from other sources. I don't know if it happened at night. I don't know if he was asleep or awake. But Constantine had a dream or a vision of some sort. And he saw in the sky either, I'm not sure, either a cross or, more likely, a Cairo. This symbol right here, which is the first two letters of the name of Christ. It often is on like communion tables and stuff and religious things at Cairo. And the words in hoc simio, you guys know this, I bet. Vinces. In this sign you will conquer. Saw this in a vision. And he knew it was from the Christian God. And he decided, okay, Christian God's sending me a message. I'm not sure what this means, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have all my soldiers paint this on their shields. And I'm going to ask the God of the Christians to be with me in the battle. And he did. And he fabulously won. He took out Maxentius. I mean, so Maxentius like, oh, silly old Constantine's headed. I'm going to go over on the other side of the river to meet him. But, you know, I broke the bridge down. So I'm going to make a boat bridge where you tie the boats together in and they went across. Terrible slaughter. They're running back across this boat bridge. The boats come loose. People are falling in. People are drowning in the Tiber. Maxentius is one of them. I mean, he just blows out all opposition. And everybody hails him as their savior because Maxentius was so unbearable. From this time, Constantine believes that the God of the Christians has a special plan for his life. The God of the Christians has spoken to him, and he's going to serve the God of the Christians. Now, you'll read books and you'll hear people trash talk Constantine. Constantine did not get baptized until he was almost on his deathbed. This was not abnormal, however. There was sort of at the time a mistaken idea of what repentance was available after baptism, frankly. You know, like what do we do if I commit some grievous sin after I'm baptized? is there grace for me? And so some people just put it off. Like, I'm just going to have my sins washed away once and for all, and then really hope I don't sin big time, between that and my death. And Constantine was one of them. He did have a wife and a son executed, but we don't know the details. Before we, we really seriously don't know the details. Obviously, somebody was making accusations against someone else and setting someone up. And so people will say, oh, that Constantine, he's just a hypocrite. He's a poser. He's not really a Christian. He did maintain the title Pontifex Maximus. But he was the emperor of everyone. Do you know what I mean? The problem? It's the problem like an American president. He's not just the president of the Christians that are in the country. You're the president of everyone. You have to listen to everyone. And so, but Constantine, after he took care of the East, which is part of what books 9 and 10 are about, and we'll talk about that in 2 weeks, he proclaimed that Christianity was a fully legal religion in the empire. He didn't say everyone had to become a Christian. Paganism, there were still pagans. He didn't persecute the pagans. He didn't persecute the Christians. He said, we're going to have religious toleration in the empire. But I highly recommend that you become a Christian because the true God spoke to me and helped me. And it was very likely that if you were a Christian or said you were, you would get a better job under Constantine. So a lot of people might say, hey, I'm a Christian. You got a job for me? I'm one of them, and they weren't really. It's not going to stick around permanently. There's going to be another wave of persecution. But Constantine did something no one else had done. Christianity is now legal, completely and utterly legal. We will stop all persecution of Christians. And he gave enormous sums of money to build new churches in Bethlehem, Jerusalem, various holy sites, he financed churches. That's Constantine. He is the hero of the books 9 and 10. Okay, read books 9 and 10, write the Summa. Again, I'm so sorry that my sickness has sort of gotten us out of kilter, and it just feels like we're dragging through, like we've been reading Eusebius forever, but give me one more discussion time of Eusebius, and then we will launch into a guy who spent vast amounts of his time in exile, because for a while it sounded like there was only one guy left who would stand up and say, Jesus is fully God. When the whole world went dark, one guy stood up and said, Jesus is God. His name's Athanasius, and we'll meet him next time. All right. Thank you. Have a good break.
You don't have to kill your own sickness. It's not your fault.
I know.
You cannot feel better.
Well, I know. But it